Hello, Logan McCulloch here, also known as Unitic, out on the Appalachian Trail, and this is my first attempt to record a video that is going to serve two purposes. One, it's going to be the epilogue video to the YouTube series I did chronicling my hike on the Appalachian Trail here in 2013. Started in July and got off the trail in December. 5 months, almost 1,900 miles. But it's also going to serve as a video presentation to my friends at the Louisville Esoteric Society. So I'm going to take a crack at trying to produce this in a 45 to 60 minute video and serve two audiences, although there's a lot of overlap among those folks who've been following me on the trail via YouTube, as well as my friends from the Louisville Esoteric Society. So I wrote a summary that's posted on the Louisville Esoteric Society website that I'd like to read at the beginning of this video, just so kind of everybody's on the same sheet of music about what I'm hoping to cover. It's a big topic that includes Lyme disease, the AT, but quite a bit more as well. So I'm calling this talk Journey Through Lyme, Lyme disease, the Appalachian Trail, and one man's search for meaning within the matrix. And I'm going to refer to some notes as well as my laptop here. One of my lingering Lyme symptoms that bugs me the most is cognitive issues, and I kind of lose my train of thought more often than I used to. So forgive me if I look away from time to time to catch up with where I am. In the latter half of 2013, I walked almost 1,900 miles from Maine to North Carolina on the Appalachian Trail. I lived in the wilderness and walked all day, almost every day, for 5 months. My motivation to hike the AT included my desire to raise awareness of the fastest spreading infectious disease in the United States, if not the world. My one most consistent and meaningful experience on the trail reinforced this knowing. By nature, the vast majority of people are kind, generous, compassionate, and empathetic. Yet contrasted against this recurring theme, this quote kept coming to my mind on the trail. Quote, "Our society is run by insane people for insane objectives. I think we're being run by maniacs for maniacal ends, and I think I'm liable to be put away as insane for expressing that. That's what's insane about it." Unquote. And that was a quote from John Lennon. Over the previous 2 years, Lyme disease had knocked me to the ground, literally and figuratively. In the years prior to my illness, I had become well aware of what some now refer to as the Matrix, from the movie fame, an interlocking system of mechanisms and structures of social control and manipulation. At least that's my definition of it. But my personal experience with all the various aspects of this, what I believe is an engineered epidemic called Lyme disease, brought me face to face with what I believe John Lennon was trying to point out. I left for the trail with the hope that I would find some insight, some greater meaning and purpose to my personal journey within the world I inhabit. All my life I've yearned for answers to those grand eternal questions about life. Given my personal experience of true human nature, one of my questions is this: why is that nature of compassion and empathy and generosity not reflected in our greater shared societal reality? During this talk, I'm going to do my best to illustrate both what I mean by the Matrix and what answers, insights, and gifts came to me during my journey. I highly recommend watching the free internet documentary Thrive, either before or soon after my presentation. It will help add scope, context, and additional insights and research resources to my presentation, and I'll link Thrive in the YouTube comment box, but you can find it at www.thrivemovement.com. Thrive Movement, all one word. So let me tell you a little bit about me, so you can understand the messenger and kind of a little bit about where I've come from and what I'm all about. If you've been following my videos, I've been trying to be as real as I can and as truthful and honest as I can, so you get a sense of the messenger and can decide whether or not some of the message may be of value to you. I'm born and raised here in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm 53 years old now. Been struggling with Lyme disease going on 3 years. May have had it longer, but definitely since May of 2011, it has waylaid me in many, many ways. I am a U.S. Army veteran. I was a forward observer in the 101st Airborne Division. In the early 80s, I got my undergraduate degree here at the University of Louisville using my VA benefits and got a degree in finance. Worked in banking for a few years, did not jive with that, and left and went back to graduate school and studied modern European history at the University of Louisville. Ran out of money and was not able to finish that degree and wound up teaching at a wilderness education program for emotionally troubled teens for a bit before I kind of stumbled my way into the nonprofit world, going to work as a green fundraiser in my early 30s back in the 1990s with Metro United Way here in Louisville, Kentucky. Worked in the nonprofit world for 20 years with United Way, an organization called the Muhammad Ali Center here in Louisville, the Nature Conservancy, and most recently, almost 10 years with the American Red Cross. I left there in February of 2013 as their Chief Development Officer for the Kentuckiana region of the Red Cross, doing financial development, public relations, marketing, a little bit of jack of all trades, and I was an executive officer with the Kentuckiana region. When I was in graduate school studying European history, I really wanted to become a teacher. And being a teacher is definitely kind of a part of my makeup, and perhaps you've seen a bit of that side of me on these videos. That period was a really, really influential period in my awakening to understanding more about the world that, to my earliest memories, always confused me. I remember as a little kid, I couldn't put this into words then, but just having this feeling that something was deeply, deeply off with this world. So much of it did not make sense to me. And again, now I kind of understand it as this conflict between what I believe is true human nature at the individual level and the community level, the neighborhood level, the family level, and what we see played out at the macro level, at the level of states and nations and religions and larger movements where some other aspect of human behavior seems to develop that flies in the face of what my experience was on the Appalachian Trail, of that kindness and empathy and decency of people. It's my experience that I had at the Red Cross, where after devastating natural disasters, when people have lost everything, what I saw time and again was people not giving that a second thought in the moment and doing everything they could to help their neighbor, to help a stranger, to give of their last assets just because another human being needed that outreach. And I saw that time and again to the point where in a traumatic situation like an aftermath of a tornado or a hurricane, all that learned conditioning that we adopt as we grow up, whatever part of the world we live in, falls away. And I think people respond from their heart, and I think the heart is where real human nature resides. And that was my experience on the AT too. That was the one greatest learning, is that consistent nature of the vast, vast, vast majority of people. Not 100%, but the majority of people, I think that's what is deep in their heart. In grad school, I was studying modern European history with some amazing professors when Gulf War I broke out. And we had something we called at the time a teach-in, where we basically had lecturers come in for all the students and let us all examine all different aspects of why we seem to be leading up to going to a war. in 1991. And a professor by the name of Howard Zinn, who wrote a book called The People's History of the United States, came and lectured at the University of Louisville, and it was a huge influence on me. I had not heard of him before. He was an activist in the 60s and a social historian, and I remember being so taken by a whole nother interpretation of U.S. history than I had ever been exposed to in my public school education. Well, when I left graduate school, I was changed, and I remember taking his book with me, and when I was working at the camp, living out in the woods 6 days a week, my one day off from being a counselor to about a dozen emotionally troubled teenage boys, I would sit in the hammock at this wilderness camp down in Tennessee and read that book, The People's History. And it changed me. And it lit a fire in me. And from that moment on, I've been just an avid researcher of more diverse history. History of the public education system became a passion of mine. History of Western medicine, particularly the medical system of the United States. History of energy. And a history of things like foundations, private foundations, and of U.S. government and European governments. It was an eye-opening period for me, in that some of what confused me so much about the world as a child began to make some sense. And honestly, in 2020 hindsight, although I didn't use this word at the time, that's where the introduction to the Matrix began to weave its way into my consciousness. A few years prior to catching Lyme disease, I had made new friends at the beginnings of the Louisville Esoteric Society. Some amazing folks, seekers, researchers, who presented a variety of topics that really expanded my own awareness, my own sense of self. And that was, really, really transformative for me to be exposed. Excuse me while I get back to my correct page on the laptop. To be exposed to ideas that help deepen, my understanding of the world around me. So by the time I got Lyme disease and experienced up close and personal some aspects of the medical matrix, the for-profit medicine world, which, for-profit medicine, I've said it before, is a total oxymoron. As a finance graduate, I know, because it was hammered into my head, as it was all other finance students, that the number one rule of corporate finance is maximize shareholder equity. Make your shareholders wealthy. Everything else is secondary. So corporate medicine, you can guess what the priority is, and we all experience that. And the patient comes second. I'm totally convinced that corporate medicine is all about profits, and healthy people don't make you money. And that has been a part of my experience with Lyme disease, because I've seen up close and personal how thousands upon thousands upon thousands of families are being devastated by this epidemic, as well as so many other emerging diseases and maladies. And we're not seeing cures. We're seeing obfuscation and lots of new drugs and lots of big profits for the pharma-medical cabal. Yep, I said it. So this quote kept coming to my mind too, as I was experiencing this Alice in Wonderland existence of Lyme from the inside out. Everything is backwards. Just look at us. Everything is backwards. Everything is upside down. Doctors destroy health. Lawyers destroy justice. Psychiatrists destroy minds. Scientists destroy truth. Major media destroys informations. Religions destroy spirituality. And governments destroy freedom. And that's a quote attributed to a gentleman by the name of Michael Elner. And as I said in my preview video, you may or may not have seen that, I'm not here to try and convince you to my point of view. And if I slip into that preaching mode, I apologize, and I'll try and catch myself and come back to just sharing information and sharing insights that are meaningful to me. And hopefully you may find some value in all or part of this presentation. One of my favorite phrases is take what you like and leave the rest. And I'll try and maintain some equanimity in my presentation moving forward. So I'm going to record this total presentation in smaller segments so it doesn't take so long to upload to YouTube. And this first segment, I really just wanted to kind of explain who I am and my background and what brought me to the Appalachian Trail, and talk a little bit about what I meant by the matrix. The night before I left for the AT to drive to Maine, I think it was July 8th, I had a conversation with my then 20-year-old son, who a few months later was going to be traveling to Japan for a semester overseas. And I talked to him about what I saw in the systems of control and profit and egos that dominate, my country. At least that's my perspective. 1%, if you will, dominating the 99%, controlling industries like medicine and food production and chemicals and energy and on and on and on and on, creating a world that I didn't want, but I had to take responsibility for, because the truth be told, I'm a participant in creating that reality. All realities that I experience are at root a part of my consciousness and my choices and my attitude. And that has been a big part of my Appalachian Trail experience, is coming to understand what role responsibility plays in the individual and in turn collective experience, whether it's through a chronic disease like Lyme disease, whether it's through the loss of a loved one, whether it's through some great success. We're creating it all. And freedom, true freedom, is held within that acceptance of responsibility. So I talked to Gabe about the matrix more out of fear for him than these insights. And he's a very wise young man studying history and philosophy, and gave me some sage advice. And he said, "Dad, the difference between you and I is you seem to focus on achieving perfection or striving for perfection in the external world, whereas I, Gabe, focus more on the same in the internal world." And that was a very thought-provoking observation from a young man who probably knows me better than anybody on earth. And we talked a bit that night about the truth lies somewhere in the middle, because you can't do one without the other. The internal and the external are two sides of the same coin. So I still feel called to comment on the external world. It feels like it's a natural part of what I've come to this earth to express, and I'm just going to try and do it with less fear, more love, and just honesty, because that's all I can really control. So let me wrap this video up with a couple of observations and a demonstration, one example of the matrix in action that we can easily overlook on a day-to-day basis, but is something most Americans can relate to if they just give some thought to it. One, I want to observe that when we consistently look at systems, political systems, economic systems, spiritual and religious systems, and we think that all that needs to happen for our lives to get better is for those systems to be fixed mend them because they're producing some outcome that doesn't meet our desired end. I would toss out to you that those very systems may be working perfectly. They just may be ultimately designed to produce something different than we all collectively have been taught to expect from them. For example, the political system. Yeah, I've been alive 53 years, but I've been a student of history for most of that time. And if you step back and look from a macro perspective, nothing has changed a whole lot whether we elect a Republican or a Democrat or an independent or a libertarian. There seems to be the same perpetual issues, and I think we've got to look for the wizard behind the curtain to understand what the game really is all about. And I don't get caught up in that particular system anymore because I don't believe that the outcome of fixing that system that I've been taught to expect is anything that system is capable of producing. And two words that really stick in my mind, and I'd offer them up to you to give serious thought to what they really mean, are corporation and civilization. I think, like that quote mentioned, our understanding of those words is backwards. Corporation at its root has the word corpse, meaning dead. Corporations are not alive. They're not flesh and blood human beings. Yeah, we may work within them, but they are artificial creations of the mind. And civilization is portrayed to us as a good thing, that we're civilized. And a lot of what I've seen in my world would fly in the face of aspiring to be a civilized human being. If it means succeeding at someone else's expense and winning only if it creates losers, I don't get the perfection in that. Anyway, my 2 cents worth, and I know I'm kind of rambling here, but it's a bit of a stream of consciousness. So this is the part for the audience participation exercise. If you will, dig into your wallet, humor me here, and pull out a piece of paper currency. It could be a $1 bill, $5 bill, $10 bill, whatever you've got. I happen to have a 1. And take a look at that phrase at the top of the bill. It says Federal Reserve Note. And forgive me if I state the obvious for a lot of you guys that have been doing your own research, but most people believe that this is a unit of value, that it represents an asset. Where the truth is, it's just the opposite. This is a unit of debt. That's what a note means in corporate finance. The dollar bill did not used to have that phrase on there. Federal Reserve Note, meaning an IOU. The Federal Reserve is a private bank. It's actually a consortium of banks owned by private individuals, many of which are not born and raised in the United States or even naturalized citizens. They're foreign bankers, is sometimes the phrase. The Federal Reserve came into existence in 1913 when a lame duck Congress railroaded it through right before Christmas recess and gave it a 100-year charter to be the bank that's empowered to produce currency in the United States. So why does that mean anything to you? Well, that used to be the role of the United States Treasury, which is a federal government agency, unlike the Federal Reserve, who obviously took that name as a way to delude people into believing that it was actually a part of their government when it's not. It's a totally independent organization of the people you elect and I elect to run this country. But more than that, being a unit of debt, every time the Federal Reserve issues one of these dollars, As an IOU, $1 plus a little more is owed back to them. So for example, the U.S. Treasury may float a treasury bond and sell it, and they sell it to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve then produces the dollars for that amount, say $1 million bond. And for each one of those dollars produced, which is actually a note, $1 plus some is owed back. So if you want to understand one example of the root of the matrix, this is it. And it's so simple. It's beautiful in its deceptiveness, but it's so simple, as are most of these examples that we could talk about. They're all hidden in plain sight. But because this is a unit of debt, and every time one of these is created, that dollar plus a little more is owed back, by definition, there can never, ever, 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 ever be enough of these in circulation to pay the debt down. It's impossible. Think about it. If you create $1, and every time $1 is created, $1.05 is owed to pay this IOU back, then how will there ever be enough dollars in circulation to pay off a debt? And the truth of the matter is, the vast majority of your federal income tax goes to pay the interest on the debt created when the Federal Reserve, a private bank, issues these notes. Tons of information out there, public information, great books, all fact-based, that explain this in greater detail. But the reason I wanted to use it as an example as I close this segment of the video is it's so clear the game that's being played, because every time you see a federal politician, a national politician, a congressman, a congresswoman, a U.S. senator, a federal appointee, your own president, babble on about reducing the deficit and cutting down on debt, they are either glaringly ignorant or outright liars, because it is impossible in the current system to eradicate debt, because everything is backwards and money actually is debt. So with that, I'm going to leave that little nugget with you, close this part of the video, and then I'm going to come back and record another segment and talk a little bit more about the Appalachian Trail and Lyme disease and some of the insights that have come to me through that experience. Thanks for listening.